Hi, everyone. So I think we should start. Oops. So I think my thing is all this tech stuff's a bit funky at the moment. So anyhow, I'd like to welcome everyone who's here and various locations around the world, basically, and who's either up at 7 or who's just finished lunch or is about to go home or about to get to bed. But I'd like to welcome everyone to this conversation, and thank you for joining us to attend this panel conversation we've entitled Cross-continental Conversation in the Cone of Uncertainty. This panel is for MCAD a kickoff towards our opening of Haegue Yang, the Cone of Concern, next week on October 15, which we hope you can attend. To those who joined us for the online preview, what we showed was just a glimpse of the exhibition. However, this panel conversation is unique in the sense that it is a conversation of 4 curators across 4 institutions who have worked through the conditions of the pandemic on a Haegue Yang solo exhibition. And let me tell you, that is that is challenge upon challenge upon challenge that I think should be applauded across the board. I'm hoping that this conversation will bring our institutions towards an understanding of how we all are coping with the challenges of working under the changes brought on by COVID-19, and essentially really go beyond our silos, which we sort of tend to find ourselves in when we're dealing not with just problems of putting up exhibitions, but of something much bigger than that we all share. And Haegue always speaks of this aspect of solidarity, and I think this is an interesting way for us to actually experience it. For a good while, I think it was only Haegue who was the linchpin for all the institutions and who was aware that her exhibitions were converging towards a particular moment. All of us perhaps were unaware of the other through the intensity of putting together a Haegue Yang exhibition. So we're taking this opportunity to discuss how we all managed through the pandemic to put together an exhibition and, perhaps keep our sanity together. The challenges we had to negotiate using our experience working on an exhibition of the same artist as a case in point. And through this discussion, how our specific contexts of Canada, where Adelina is based, Seoul, Korea, where Jihoi is based as well, she's here, and the UK, where Anne is based at the moment. Continue to weather the first, the second waves of the virus spread, and as well as the political and social upheavals in certain areas of the world. The conversation will have all the curators share their exhibitions, and I will moderate the flow for questions. Please send these to Benilde17, who will accept the questions, and we will read this in the end and try to answer them as much as we can. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'll be introducing them, and they'll be sharing the experience of working with Haegue, a Haegue Yang exhibition, and Haegue as well as we go along. So first, we'd like to have Jihoi Lee, who is the curator of the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Korea. Jihoi is a curator at the MMCA, where she curated Haegue Yang, oxygen and water. I keep on mixing these two things together.
O2 and H2O.
O2 and H2O. Solo exhibition of Haegue. And I think this is a retrospective.
It's a newly commissioned exhibition.
Yes, it's with the annual MMCA Hyundai Motor Series for this year. She's curated Architecture and Heritage, Unearthing the Future in 2019, and an architectural intervention at the Deoksugung Palace and MMCA's Front Yard. working with 5 architects in Asia. In 2018, she organized the Essential Duchamp exhibition with Matthew Affron, presenting approximately 150 collections of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She's also curated Becca Lemoine through the lens of domesticity, a mini retrospective of architectural filmmakers of Ila Becca and Louise Lemoine. She hosted Superhumanity, Post-Labor Psychopathology, Plasticity, a symposium and a publication project with Efflux Architecture in 2017. And she created the exhibition of Common Accounts, 3 Ordinary Funerals at the first Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. She was the curator of a 3-year research project with Kyung Park, Imagining Eurasia from 2015 onwards at the, is that correct? At the Asia Cultural Center in Gwangju. Oops, there's a dog somewhere. Somebody has a dog or a cat or somewhere. And she is a deputy director and managing director for Cruz Ives. She was the Korean, she curated the Korean pavilion at the 2014 Venice Architecture Biennale, which received the Golden Lion. So I'd like to have Jihoi take over the conversation. Jihoi.
Thank you, Joselina, for inviting me to such a timely event. I'm very happy to be able to speak about Haegue Yang's O2 and H2O, which just opened at the end of last month at MMCA Seoul. I wonder if someone can play the presentation, or should I? Okay. If you can go full screen so that you don't see the slideshow, or yeah, okay. Is it good? Everybody see it? Okay. Yeah, okay. So next slide, please. Before I start, let me briefly introduce about the museum. The National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea was founded in 1969, and now it has 4 branches: Seoul, Gwacheon, Deoksugung, and Cheongju, all of which are co-located in distinct urban locations and operated with different focal points. MMCA Seoul is at the central city, having 52,000 square meter area with 8 gallery spaces. Since its opening in 2013, it is considered the most visited and representative museum in Korea. Next, please. Can you play the video? Okay. O2 and H2O was organized in the framework of MMCA's annual exhibition series, as Joselina kindly mentioned, sponsored by the Hyundai Motor Company. Each year since 2014, the museum has been selecting 1 mid-career artist to commission an exhibition with a fairly generous budget. MMCA's curators propose artists for designated years, and it goes through a rigorous jury process to come up with 1 final artist at the end. And it was November 2017 that I proposed Haegue Yang, and thankfully given the opportunity. So we've been preparing the show for nearly 3 years. I think you should go to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So one of the ambitions that the MMCA Hyundai Motor Series seeks to achieve is to provide a platform for a mid-career artist to experiment and create new works that help broaden the spectrum of one's practice. So the framework of the exhibition was not necessarily intended as a retrospective, but we ended up including some of the old works to give a context of which the new pieces of work has developed. The exhibition title O2 and H2O stems from the title of an artwork that Haegue chose to use in 2002 called Air and Water. For 2020, the air and water turned O2 and H2O, a chemical symbol of the same materials, insinuating the processes of abstraction in the realm of reality that surround us every day. Next slide. The main stage of the exhibition is Seoul Box, the atrium of the museum, Gallery 5, and the large corridor adjacent to it. At Seoul Box, next slide, please. At Seoul Box, a 10-meter high cylindrical structure is installed called Silo of Silence, clicked core. Next. The inner layer is made of blue blinds, and the outer layer is made of black blinds. Next. The blue core slowly rotates to an extent that, the movement is recognizable when looked at really closely. Next slide, please. The work is also accessible from the lobby floor, where a certain perspective, the blinds are juxtaposed with the traditional architecture visible through the window. Next slide. The structural logic of the blind installation is also employed in the spatial configuration of the Gallery 5. All of the entrances leading into Gallery 5 is replicated and stand in a row along the wall. Next slide. As an element of the exhibition called Chroma Key Wall Body Passage. The inner surfaces are colored in green and blue. The blue screen's chroma key, suggesting a rite of passage leading to a different dimension. Next. As one passes by these walls, or continuously traverses the replicated entrances, one will see a series of lacquer paintings. Next. The walls are stripped bare except for the front and the inner surfaces, making sure that the walls are perceived as temporary. Next. This is a different view. Next. These lacquer paintings seal the climatic conditions of the artistic environment for the production, containing dust, bugs, and hair, as well as the traces of rain and wind. Next. Also contain the residues of vegetables and fruits that Haegue had eaten at the studio. Next. As well as the byproduct of her studio practices, showing quad paper or blades. Next. In between those walls, you could feel the great sense of opening precisely because of the relative spatial compression of these walls. Out towards, you could see parts of Soluit upside down here and a nonagonal door opening on the rear end. Next. This is a doorknob that is commonly used in Korea. Next. These are 4 types of doorknobs specifically produced for this installation: gold and silver types, the side of the keyhole and the side of the button lock. Next. They draw these nonagonal enneagram, the very geometry that appears frequently in Haegue's work. Next. Next to these roundy doorknobs are the sonic domesticus, dressed up with roundy bells. Next. These are the latest iteration of sonic sculpture that has a concrete shape of an inanimate object. There are 4 appliances that usually serve us in our everyday life: iron, hairdryer, computer mouse, and pot and stove. Next. Next to these sonic sculptures are Soluit upside down, where Haegue chooses a specific original work of Soluit and flip it upside down. Next. But in this case, the original work itself is a large cubic structure. It is actually now the collection of AGO. So by consequence, the very act of flipping it upside down becomes rather useless. Next. The only remaining trace of turning it upside down is the fact that they are suspended from the ceiling. Next. Even though they optically seem to be standing from the ground. Next. One of this tween is slightly smaller, so it looks like floating in the air. Next. Next up is the DMZ undo. Next. This wallpaper is the result of a rigorous survey on the demilitarized zone known as DMZ in between 2 Koreas. Haegue's main target of study was of the ecosystem, both natural and artificial environment of the given land, specifically on how certain energy moves and are accelerated to an extent that they're warped and distorted. Underneath it, on two protruded surfaces on the ground, as a continuation from the wallpaper, next, are these sonic sculptures based on the shapes of a closed drying rack. So far, the foldable drying rack has appeared in various forms in Haegue's oeuvre, but for these, she was focusing on the number of cases that the structure could be wrapped in bells. In other words, these two sculptures share exactly same skeleton, but how to wrap it dictates the final shape. Next. This is a view from the chroma key wall. And if you go to the very end, a little door that you can see from the back, you will meet, next slide, please. These wooden spoons, 108 of them, made by someone who's very dear to Haegue's mother, but also a quasi family to the artist called Kim Woo-hee, a carpenter who runs Mogu Workshop. Next. The spoons that he created are incredibly unique, both in forms, but also the stories around them. Next. Carpenter Kim is a storyteller, a writer, as much as a craftsman who is not necessarily belong to the conventional notion of craftsmanship. Next. Haegue brought Kim's wooden spoons and cased them with these surrealist-looking vitrines. Next. Almost looking like Yves Tanguy or Calder's Circus. Next. The room next to it has an extremely high ceiling with moderate floor area, so the verticality is strongly felt. Here she used the sonic ropes all the way up to the ceiling. Next. 15-meter ropes with chains and bells. Next. Draws our attention towards the skylight. Next. With all these intermediate sculptures, 3 serpents and 1 imugi. Next. Imugi is a creature between a snake and a dragon from a folkloric tale known to bring clouds in the sky. Next. As you go out at the corridor, 5 Doing Undoing is installed, a brand new typology that Haegue developed for the exhibition. This is the first time that she ever tries this banner types. So the main motif of this work is Yang Oheng. It's a sort of Korean traditional way of reading the world through elements and colors and directions. So it talks about 5 elements: water, tree, fire, earth, and metal. And the 5 corresponding colors, black, blue, red, yellow, and white. Next. Each banner contains what Haegue calls the quote-unquote secularized imageries of the materials, implying on the fact that our reality is always experienced in totality, that one cannot distinguish the continuity or quote-unquote slippage of our perception. But it is the names that we call differ depending on the hegemony or the systems of apprehending the world. Next. In between these banners are the bundle of museum speakers, what Haegue calls sound fruits, emanating a sound piece called genuine cloning, using the voice of an artificial intelligence, which is a result of the deep learning of Haegue's own voice. Next. But it speaks in ASMR, a whispering sound, talking about the absurdity of naming the typhoon among the nations of the Asia Pacific Typhoon Committee, etc., etc. So yeah, okay, so that is the end of our exhibition. Next. Could you play the video? Oh, no, yeah. You need to probably play the button, yeah. yeah, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the byproducts of the exhibition. So this is Haegue's very first Korean anthology that we worked very hard on to cover a total of 36 texts produced along with the artistic development of the artist from the year 2001 to 2020. You can turn the page. Next slide, please. And this is also a video, so you can maybe play both videos. Yeah, also the bottom one as well, simultaneous. No. You can play both videos. Yeah. So yesterday we had a VIP private viewing, limited to 50 people only, for the close collaborators of the exhibition, with musical performances with this incredibly talented group of musicians. From this summer, we have conducted various on and offline workshops and meetings to concretize the concept of the musical pieces. And it really was a beautiful moment yesterday. So I just wanted to share a bit of it. Next. And we have various online conversation series. But one interesting event that is worth noting here is the letter project called To Samcheonro 30. The address of our, this is the address of our museum. It's a public program. And the title, the To Samcheonro 30, it somehow overlaps with Haegue's very first solo exhibition in Korea called Sadong 30. So the correspondence of letters is one of the most ancient form of communication. And yet it feels like an interesting alternative from the limited options that we have in the era of untact, where pretty much all of our communication is restrained only within the realm of the digital, like today. Next. Could you play the two videos, please? Also the bottom one? Yeah. Also, because of the limited access to the museum, we only accept, allow 100 people per hour to get in. So we try to, so it's not like before, right? The kind of, the power that the exhibition could deliver to the people. So we try to increase the visibility of the exhibition by collaborating with fashion brands, so that the exhibition contents are distributed to the broader audience in the department store, as well as on and offline shopping malls, etc. So collaborating with the commercial sector was one of the ways to overcome the restrained accessibility in the era of pandemic. Yeah, I think that's all I have prepared for today. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jihoi. That was amazing. Because I just wanted to share with everyone that Jihoi's was the first show of Haegue that opened. It opened in 29th of September. And then, and I think Jihoi's exhibition, Jihoi's show as well, was the one that was on time, just a week late.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really change the dates. And we somehow, I mean, there were some, attempts or kind of temptation to kind of change because it was so uncertain.
Yeah. But
somehow Haegue said, in the era of pandemic, you just have to stick to your guts and you just kind of stick to it. And miraculously, I think it was Saturday or something. It was Tuesday, the opening. And on Saturday, we learned that the museum will be open again.
Fantastic.
So I called Haegue a shaman.
I think she is going to be a shaman for all of us, for all our, our work. But interestingly enough, Adelina, whom I think we should go show herself online, her show was supposed to run in March, wasn't it?
April. End of April.
End of April. And not March, no? End of April.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can imagine what's happened because of this delay. And I think it's interesting because after that, after Jihoi, she opened her show on the 1st of October. So in
That's right. We opened October 1st. So the exhibition originally was scheduled to open at the end of April. When everything shut down in mid-March, we were in the middle of preparing the space, just finishing the preparation of the space and starting to receive some of the shipments. So we had to kind of stop cold and patiently wait for the world to figure out
itself
new protocols around everything.
Yeah. So I'd like to introduce Adelina Vlas. She's the associate curator for the Art Gallery of Ontario, Canada, and she was the one who opened Haegue show 2 days after MMCA. And I think just to think about that, 2 solo shows, and when you see Adelina's exhibition, you'll realize how having these 2 shows happening within the span of 2 days, opening within a span of 2 days, just seems actually for me incredible. So Adelina's, prior to joining AGO in 2014, Adelina held curatorial positions at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the National Gallery of Canada, where she concentrated on permanent collections, displays, and exhibitions. She holds a master's degree in curating contemporary art from the RCA, a master's degree in art history from York University, and a bachelor's degree in art history from McGill University. Adelina's area of specialty is post-war contemporary art with a focus on conceptual and time-based media practices. So I'll turn over the screen to Adelina, and she'll share with us Haegue Yang Emergence.
Thank you so much, Joselina, and thank you, the panelists, for participating in this very timely conversation, as Jihoi mentioned. Congratulations, Jihoi. It's a beautiful, beautiful exhibition. And I've seen those performances happening yesterday. I saw the videos, and it's just such a wonderful way to bring life and activity to the space. So the exhibition, Haegue Yang Emergence, very much like the exhibition at MMCA, has been in the making for the last 3 years. We started our conversations with Haegue in 2017. And really kind of the seed for the conversation, the Art Gallery of Ontario is one of the largest encyclopedic collecting institutions in Canada. And as Jihoi mentioned, we have a historical, modern, and contemporary collection, and that's Soloist sculpture that inspired the piece in MMCA is part of our collection. And in 2014, we acquired the work, a sonic sculpture by Haegue Yang, and it was already kind of part of our kind of list of artists we were really thinking about. Me and the previous curator here, senior curator of contemporary art, Katie Scott, and we were thinking and talking about Haegue Yang quite a bit. So when the opportunity came to think about artists who will speak to the context here in Toronto, but also to the global, to bring in a global perspective, Haegue's name came up and immediately was embraced by our director and the institution, and the journey began. What was really interesting about the journey is that how much, and I'm sure you recognize that in your own processes of research and planning, is like how much of it involves traveling around the world, meeting with Haegue, seeing her exhibitions, and being part of that world that she inhabits so comfortably, and she reflects so much in her work. So as I'm just, if I can have the next slide, please. This is just to, acknowledge all those who have supported the exhibition here in Canada and internationally. And the next slide. And this is to give you a sense of all of the lenders involved. There are over 80 objects in the exhibition, all coming from different parts of the world, including Korea, multiple countries in Europe, and of course, the United States and Canada. And this is just one of the elements that became quite stressful with the lockdown, was how to make sure that all those loans made it into the building in time. And in a way, that schedule also defined our new timeline for the reopening, right? And that's how we ended up being pushed so far into the fall, although the museum reopened to the public in early July. Next slide, please. So emergence, the title of the exhibition, is a concept that Haegue brought forward last summer in 2019, July 2019. She came to the Art Gallery of Ontario for an intensive 2-week residency, where she was in the building with us, with a team, introducing the exhibition to various departments and talking about the ideas and concepts around it. And emergence is really refers to a natural social and economic phenomenon in which a whole entity exhibits quality when it reaches a certain level of complexity, exhibits qualities and behavior that its individual parts do not have on their own. And Haegue was very much interested in applying this concept of emergence to the idea of a survey exhibition, and how here the concept suggests that particular works remain loyal to their own time of creation, even as they are perceived differently in the condensed history of a survey show. And this is one of the important details about the exhibition, is also that it's a focused survey show looking at Haegue's work over the last 25 years, and it's the largest of its kind in North America, and first of its kind in North America. So if I can have the next slide, you see here, this is the introduction into the exhibition inhabits in totality the 5th floor of the contemporary tower. The tower is designed by Frank Gehry. The spaces, the architecture is predetermined. There are those cubes of different size with different heights of ceilings. As we walk through the space, you will get to be familiar with the architecture. And really the architecture in a way determines what can comfortably live in each room, and it cannot be changed. It does not have that flexibility. So although we are looking, as I said, at work made since the mid-90s to the present, a chronological display was not really possible given the architecture. So we did create a trajectory through the exhibition, and I'm going to walk you through that trajectory that we encourage visitors to take to experience the work, and starting with this platform where we introduce a number of sculptures from the last decade. And next slide, just to show you some details. There, of course, there's a way to introduce this idea of emergence of works from different series and different using a different visual language and materiality come together to give this welcome to the visitors, but also to introduce. Sorry, did I unmute myself? Okay, next slide, please. Just more details and another. And like with all, next slide, and with all of Haegue's show, I'm sure we'll learn from the presenters today. There's new work, and this intermediate at the very front of the platform is a new work presented here for the first time, and it's titled Frosty Hairy Dragon Ball 2020. Next slide. As we move through the space, we now start seeing some of the architectural interventions. And here is a space we built to present series of vulnerable arrangements, version Seoul from 2006, but recreated in 2017. And we tried with the architecture to echo the original architectural setup for the first installation. Next slide. And to also introduce kind of the various themes and families of work that Haegue has developed over time. The following room in the kind of trajectory through the exhibition is a room called Cabinet of Formative Works. And if I can have the next slide, you get to see here works that Haegue made in the mid and late 1990s when she was studying at Städteschule in Frankfurt. And this is really one of the miracles of the exhibition, because we tried to recreate the original display case that Haegue used to show this collection of objects known as the Anthology of Haegue Archives, and it's from 1998. And all we had to go with was very low resolution photograph. And of course, a lot of information from the studio and from Haegue in trying to give us a sense of materiality of that object and recreate it in the same way. So here it is. It's one of the achievements I'm quite proud of, because it was so such a challenge to try to, and I hope that when Haegue gets to see it, she'll be pleased with it. So here again, we have an introduction to her kind of early experimentation with materials and kind of how she takes on traditional forms of making, such as lacquer paintings, and makes them her own, but also this idea of institutional critique, taking the language of museological display and creating a sense of a work or really a presentation that it's imbued with this self-historicization. Next room. And here you get to see kind of how the architecture changes. And this is one of the largest rooms on the 5th floor. The ceilings are 22 feet high. So they're very, very high ceilings, and a very daunting space for any artist to try to really kind of feel comfortably. And here, this room is called Eclectic Affiliations and Permutations, and it looks at how various influences are clearly expressed in works such as the wallpaper Eclectic Totemic, which you see as the backdrop. Next slide. And we have two of the soloist vehicles that are of course intended to be moved and activated, and we do that on weekends. We see the sound element hanging from the ceiling, and is the DMZ bird song sound element, and those are the sound recording that was made during the encounter between the two Korean leaders in April of 2018, and is then echoed by another recording of the birds that inhabit that demilitarized zone, which is it has a very high biodiversity level. So it's something that Haegue juxtaposes with those in those recordings. And the next slide, and here another element that we bring into the mix are the origami pieces, the origami dust that are installed in the corners of the galleries. And then next slide, the framed origamis that are the side effects and byproducts. So moving on, we have a gallery in which we're presenting, can I see the next slide, please? The video essays that Haegue has made over time, and they're a very important part of her practice, I feel, and to have them included in the exhibition brings her voice, literally, into the space, and especially now in this context, I think it's even more important. Originally, we were going to show this on a different floor. The exhibition had a much larger footprint pre-COVID, because we wanted it to really live in multiple locations and give visitors the opportunity to encounter various elements throughout the building. But the post-COVID reality is, or the current reality, we're still in it, we're not quite past, has changed quite a bit how we use the building, how visitors can use the building. So some decisions were made about concentrating as much as possible on the 5th floor and creating that condensed experience on one floor rather than throughout the building, although there are elements that remain installed in other parts of the building. So those essays are presented kind of in a classic projection black box space, and the entire duration is close to 3 hours. So they're really that moment where if someone wants to dive deep into the kind of thinking of Haegue and her observational meditative narratives, this is the moment and the space where that can be done. And the next slide takes us to a room where we have juxtaposed traces of anonymous pupil authors, early work from 2001, where really Haegue is looking at the question and looking and questioning the very notion of authorship. And the next slide gives you a detail of those works that are pages from Korean school books, where she has through photocopying erased the text of the book and just left the marks of the students. Marks made, of course, in the process of studying and memorizing and assimilating this information. And they have their own aesthetic, but it's also this sense of how individuals kind of put some resistance against those systems that are in place to shape us as citizens. Next slide. This is really one of there are many highlights, but I think this is a really great example of how Haegue has created those sculptural pieces that have multi-sensorial elements to them and also performative quality. So this is Salim from 2009, was included in Haegue's presentation, the Korean Pavilion in Venice in the same year. And it's this structure that is, the frame is really a replica of her studio and apartment kitchen in Berlin at the time. And we see a lot of the elements that are very familiar to those who have followed Haegue's work that she's introduced in her practice since 2006, those multisensorial elements like fans and centimeters, light bulbs, and of course the organic materials such as this bunch of dried garlic. Next. We have a beautiful room with a title Eclectic Cereals and canned cozies. And what you see here is, of course, we're looking at this seriality as a way of working that is also very much part of Haegue's strategy. And her take on the post-war European avant-garde and conceptual practices. And of course, we have a selection of the cozies, this body of work that she's ongoing, creating still now. And we see another new work for the exhibition, which is her take on something that Canada is well known for, and that's maple syrup. And what you see are four different grades of local Ontario maple syrup, and you see the cozies kind of reflecting the color of each category as it goes from lighter to darker. Next slide. I apologize, the date is wrong on this. This is actually 2006, and it's After Image, which is an installation that Haegue created in 2006 as an echo of a project that Jihoi mentioned, Sadong 30, was a really kind of a crucial moment in Haegue's career when she organized an exhibition herself in a space in Incheon, just outside central Seoul, and in the house that her grandparents inhabited. And it was really one of those moments where a lot of her the elements that are now associated with her practice came together or have a stage to emerge. The sensorial, of course, the multisensorial aspect that I mentioned already, but also this biographical information that is so present in so much of her work. And this installation gets, when After Image was originally created, it was as a way of trying to echo that original installation in Sadong for an exhibition in Amsterdam. And since it has been recreated in several locations using local materials. And next slide, please. And repurposed, for example, the wood that's on the floor, the wood panels are have been reused from a previous exhibition that happened here at DHO in the same space. And what we see from this angle are two elements that were also part of the original presentation in Sadong, and that's the dispersion in Sadong, the clock on the wall, and that freezer, which of course is not the same one, but the intention and the gesture of offering water to the visitors who made it to the exhibition in 2006 is echoed here through this element. And if it wasn't for COVID and our non-touching kind of strategies that we have in place now for safety, visitors would have been welcome to take a bottle of water from the fridge. Next slide, and the next one. And this kind of leads us into the second large space and on the 5th floor, which includes the series Non Indépliables. The original work, Non Indépliables Azur, if I can have the next slide, please, was which you see kind of on the left at the back, was part of Sadong 30, the first in the series, and the other ones were made in between 2009 and 2010. And again, we see here how the artist is interested in domesticity and domestic objects in particular. But this folding rack has been very much kind of at the origin of how she perceives the anthropomorphic qualities of domestic objects. And this series beautifully kind of brings together also her interest in working with craft traditions. Next. Okay, I have a voice again. Next slide, please. Another element of the exhibition is a chronology of completed dispersion du Rassenyan, and this is a recent project that Haegue's been involved with, and it's been really characterized as a biographical sculpture. She's taking the biographies of those two real-life figures, Marguerite Duras and Haegue Yang, one of a French writer and filmmaker born in French Indochina, and the other one a Korean composer who was born in Korea but left to live in Europe as a dissident. So and spent time in Germany too. So those figures are important to Haegue because she really sees them as an early example of the type of thinker, artist, intellectual, and the earlier examples of those kinds of historical figures who lived in this diasporic condition earlier or the mid of the 20th century. And the next slide is going to take us to kind of we have a selection of the lacquer paintings too, and we've seen the details of that. The next slide. And next. So the final kind of moment on the 5th floor is Boxing Ballet from 2013 to 2015. And this is coming from the collection of Liam Museum in Seoul. And again, it's a very, very iconic work, and we're so happy to have it be part of the exhibition. And this also gets activated on weekends. Can I see the next few slides? Next. And the next one. Oh, that's it. Next. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So the last detail of the exhibition I'm going to talk about is this new commission. So I mentioned Haegue's residency last summer here in Toronto. So when she was here, she spent time getting familiar with the building and the architecture. And one of the things that she learned about was she was interested in the space where the work is installed, and this is called the Tannenbaum Sculpture Atrium. And what we see here, it's the architecture history of the institution made visible. On the right of the screen through the glass window, you see an older structure, and that is called Grange House. It's the original house that was at the foundation of the institution, was the gift made to the city to build the museum. On the left, that gray wall is part of the first building from 1919 of what was at the time Art Gallery of Toronto. It has changed name since. And then the wood paneling that you see on the east and west, so the back and are part of the Frank Gehry visual language in the new expansion that the 5th floor is part of. Next slide will show us the title of the work, Woven Currents, Confluence, Parallels. Next slide. Another view of the work. And so Haegue was very much interested in kind of this history of the institution made visible through the architecture, but also when she was here, she learned about, next slide, a two-row wampum belt, which really is a treaty between the indigenous people and the European settlers, and this was the visual inspiration for the color scheme of the new commission. So the next few slides are a few more images of it, and then this is I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adelina. This is fantastic and incredibly fascinating to see how Haegue continues to engage with local context to produce either new work or to engage the artworks from her work and the ones that are being done locally. I would like to introduce Anne Barlow, who's the director and curator at the Tate St. Ives in the UK. And Anne will be opening her show on the 24th of October. And this will be the last Haegue period of this intense Haegue space that I think has been created amongst this 3 continents in this particular period. So I'd like to introduce Anne, who's the director and curator, as I said, at the Tate St. Ives in the UK. And Anne has most recently curated exhibitions with artists Otobong Nakanga, Piget Kaland, Amy Siegel, and Rana Begum. She was also co-curator of Naum Gabo, Constructions for Real Life, and collaborating curator with Castello de Rivoli, Turin for Anna Bogilian at Tate St. Ives. She was previously artistic director of Tate St. Ives as well, and was at Art in General in New York in 2007-2016 as director. She was curator of education media programs at the New Museum, and was at the Contemporary Art and Design Glasgow Museums as curator. Across these roles, Anne has led a programmatic and institutional vision and overseen collection displays, artist residencies, new commissions, public programs, and numerous international collaborations. She also initiated award-winning programs, including the Museum Hub at the New Museum and What Now at Art in General. She's curated exhibitions with artists like Sashibu Pape, Donna Huanca, Adlita Husni Bey, Marva Arsanios, Basim Magdi, Jill Magid, and Shazad Dawood. And she has also published with Tate, the New Museum, the Henry Moore Institute, the Journal of Curatorial Studies, and the Sharjah Art Foundation, and was the curator for the 5th Bucharest Biennale, was the co-curator for the Latin Pavilion at the 55th Venice Biennale, and was the curator for the British Pavilion at the 58th Venice Biennale. I hope I didn't cut you out for that. But so we'd like to welcome Anne, and she'll probably be talking a little bit more about planning the show because she's in the throes of it, as we are. So Anne.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Just one small correction in favor of my, but I wasn't actually the curator of the British Pavilion, but I was on the selection panel.
Okay, sorry.
No, thank you so much for the introduction. So probably like many of us, I've been completely fascinated by Haegue's work for a very long time. And part of what happens is that her, working with her means that her ever-inquiring mind pulls in references not only from art, but also from other fields, from fiction to meteorology. So it really is a journey that she takes you on, both personally and institutionally. And, we're still in it. We've got a couple of weeks to go, but it is really a rich and rewarding experience. So with that, maybe I can have the first slide. I just thought it might be interesting to show where we are, because many people don't actually know where St. Ives is. also because there are two, as is typical in the UK. There's always two towns with a similar name, and this one is right at the end of the southwest point of England, at the very edge of that red stretch of land. So it's quite isolated in some ways. It's quite a wild and unique context, but it was also the site, next slide please, of a number of modernists who came to the town in the late 1930s, including Nam Gabo, Barbara Hepworth and Ben Nicholson, and along with artists who were living and working in the region. It became, remarkably enough, an international centre of modernism. So this is why St Ives is kind of on the art map to begin with. And in 1993, Tate opened Tate St Ives as a way of kind of honoring that legacy. So Tate's collection is on show in the large building that you can see with the circular gallery, which is also very important for the Haegue project I'll be talking about shortly. Gallery. So it opened in 1993. So the collection is Tate's collection, which is shared across all 4 Tate sites. And this one has a particular bent, obviously, to modernism and the role that those artists, among many others, played. In 2017, which was the part that I was going to talk about in the other half of the picture, Tate St Ives developed a kind of new building, a new extension to the original building, which allowed the organization for the very first time to have a really expansive, beautiful space, not just for retrospectives of artists relating to modernism. If you can go back one slide, thank you. You'll see maybe the oblong, the kind of white rectangular kind of pieces to the right of the circular space on top of a hill. That's actually the skylights of the new gallery. So it literally doubled in size. And while the gallery extension and the circular space, which is the original building, the footprint isn't as large as either of the 2 exhibitions that we've just seen. It is nonetheless the most expansive contemporary exhibition we have done in Tate St Ives since we opened in 2017. Can we go 2 more, please? So if you can keep going, please, to, I guess, the next 2. So stop there. So as I was saying, this is the most expansive contemporary project we've undertaken. And what you see with the large rectangular space on the top right is what we call Gallery 6. Transformed into a whole other environment. The smaller space next to it is Gallery 5, which she has devoted to the work of 3 artists who she experienced in a collection during one of the research visits to Tate St Ives. And a large part of Gallery 5 is devoted to the artist Li Wanjie. And there are also a couple of work, there's also work by Nam Gabo and Barbara Hepworth in there. And those 3 figures are really important, as you'll see when we get to the development of some of the new pieces that she made for the show. I want to pause for a second just to talk a little bit about the title, which comes from the work of the meteorologist and mathematician Edward Lorenz, who used mathematics to emulate the non-repeating or non-periodic behavior of natural weather systems. And in testing this through a number of differential equations that represented variables such as temperature, pressure, and velocity, when he tested this out, he actually found that the smallest of changes in the initial conditions resulted in highly divergent paths. And this was a discovery that was to be highly significant in the study of chaos theory. So in part, the show speaks to our prevailing desire to predict outcomes with certainty in a world that continues to be shaped by chaotic natural forces and the ongoing impact of human existence on our environment. As we move through the presentation, you'll also see that the term strange attractors also applies to the relationships that Haegue sets up across different time zones and cultures through not just objects and processes, but also in this case, artists. So the relationship that she sets up across, Li Wanjie, Nam Gabo, and Barbara Hepworth, and by implication also herself, is one of those conversations that she establishes as actually the first room that you enter when you go into that space. Can we have the next slide, please? And the next. So this is a SketchUp, because of course we're not open yet. This is the Gallery 5 I was mentioning, which is devoted to Li Wanqie, and the two pieces on the back wall. On the left is Hepworth, and on the right is Gabo, the black circle, which there's a more detailed slide of. And you can see already that there's that Haegue was created a really fantastic installation in Gallery 6 itself. And if we keep going, please, to the next one, this just gives you another view of Li Wanqie's work. And on the left, Nam Gabo, and on the right, Barbara Hepworth. And go one more, please. And that is another, it's a selection of works that were chosen to represent Li Wanqie. Haegue and I did a really fascinating visit to Cumbria to see the LYC museum, and you can see a picture of Li in the lower right corner there, to prepare for part of this exhibition. Next slide, please. And the next one. And the reason that Nam Gabo, Barbara Hepworth, and Li Wanqie, I wanted to mention them at the beginning, is that they became partly the inspiration behind these new works, these sonic intermediates, parameters unknowns, after Li, Hepworth, and Gabo respectively. So on the left is the one relating to Hepworth, in the middle is the one relating to Gabo, and on the right is the one relating to Li Wanqie. So another fantastic aspect of this exhibition is that so much new work was made, which has been particularly exciting, I think, for all of us here at Tate and Ives. Next slide, please. So this gives you an image of what you will experience when you enter the space, and you are in fact greeted by the sonic intermediate parameters unknown after Li, holding the broom-like object in its arm. And if you can continue, please. There are some aspects across our presentations that it's really interesting to see all of them together, because you can see certain connections as well as certain things that are unique. And Haegue articulates the main gallery through this dramatic freestanding wall structure with perforations inspired by traditional geometric Philippine binnacle or whirlwind textile pattern, which really creates an incredible diagonal passageway across the center. Next slide, please. And that just is an example of the original textile from which that design is taken. One more slide, please. This gives you an idea of the diagonal passageway that is created across the center. And in this passageway, she has positioned the sonic half moons encased with patterns of nickel and brass plated bells. And I think I'll just take you through the exhibition, since we lost a bit of time earlier, and just walk you through it essentially so that you can get a better idea. So one more, please. It's a close-up of the sonic half moons. And we hope at some point to be able to make one of them move, pandemic permitting. Keep going. And this gives you a kind of more distant shot of a new piece that she made called Reflected Metallic Cubist Dancing Mask, which is a really striking sculpture that is highly reflective and metallic on one side and bare on the other. Next slide, please. And this detail just gives you an idea of that. Next slide. This is a fantastic and expansive new wallpaper piece that she created especially for Tate and Ives, and it covers a large area of the wall expanse in the gallery. And partly this and a couple of other pieces in the exhibition are not literally inspired by visual elements that she encountered in Cornwall, but continuing some of the interest in meteorology and weather, but also with references to the sea and water. Continue, please. And on top of the wallpaper, we will actually be placing the lacquer painting. So on top of that, and these are just a few of the pieces that will be on show on top of the wallpaper piece. Next one. And The next slide, please. What you can see in the distance there were 2 new trustworthy series, which she makes with security envelopes, graph paper, sandpaper, laser prints, and self-adhesive holographic vinyl film in many instances. And these are 2 pieces that she made especially for Tates and Ives. And one is called the Cornish Healing Catch, trustworthy number 403, and the other one is called Fluidity on Nonagonal Crystal Matrix, trustworthy number 400. Next slide, please. And in this part of the gallery, there are several existing intermediates that we felt would be really wonderful to include in the exhibition. And these, as other speakers have mentioned, incorporate elements such as artificial straw, twine, or plants, powder-coated steel mesh, frames, stands, bells, and casters. And they are really kind of anthropomorphic creatures that seem at once both ancient and futuristic. And one of the reasons I think we felt Haegue would be such an amazing artist to invite to Tates and Ives was that, as others have said, she has this global position, but she also relates really closely to various aspects of a particular context, whether it's a cultural context, geographic, historic, and otherwise. And the fact that Cornwall has a long history of kind of prehistoric, kind of a prehistoric history, as well as a deep interest in paganism and folklore, I think it has a particular local resonance as well as one that is truly international. So we were really pleased to be able to show these 3 intermediates, Airflow of Pyramid Winnow, Running Firecracker, and Tilted Bushy Lumpy Bumpy as part of the exhibition. Next slide, please. And that's just a close-up of those 3 works. Next slide. And next one. So this is actually a photograph of St. Zanara's Church in the town of Zenner, which is fairly close to St. Ives on the Cornish coast. And as part of the research that Haegue did, we took it to various places in Cornwall just to get a sense of the history and the landscape and so on. And these kneeler cushions in the church were something that she was particularly struck by. And the one on the right, the eclipse cushion, I think, really kind of struck a chord with her. And in the slides following, if you can go to the next one, and then stop with the one after that, just pause for a second. What has happened is that with these inspired a whole new body of work called Mundus Cushion Yielding X. And these were inspired by the kneeler cushions in the church, but obviously she's also borrowing kind of traditional needlework techniques and honoring the collective skills and labor of the kind of Cornish coastal community, or the communities that made these original cushions from various parts of Britain in the first place. So we were particularly delighted that this new work was created. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the structure that she's also created as part of it, so that this will actually host, and if you move to the next slide, you'll see the SketchUp version of how this will actually look in the gallery. So as you're moving around the space and coming towards the close of Gallery 6, moving from kind of right to left and back again, this will be one of the pieces that you encounter. Next slide, please. That's just another shot of that and a slight glimpse of the door handles. One more slide, please. This, as I mentioned, this is one of those elements that does have connections with other exhibitions that we're looking at, and also the recent one at MoMA. These door handles are organized in a matrix of nonagonal shapes derived from George Jurdieff's Enneagram. And so there are actually 9 of them, and they're spaced across 2 walls. So they come across the corner, as you can see, across the white wall, and the wall it looks grey, but it's actually white. On the right hand side, and as you're leaving, you encounter once again the work, the parameters and knowns after Hepworth. So with that, let's go to the next slide and the next one. So the way in which she's treated this space is quite different in a sense from Gallery 6. This is really a kind of, it's a kind of very much lighter and almost ethereal space actually in terms of how she has approached it. We were lucky enough to have the support of Quadrat, next slide please, to be able to apply this incredible fabric, double layers of fabric across the curved glass, which is quite large in its scale. And together, when they are in this double layer, they form this kind of moire effect that you can actually see through. So it won't affect what you can see, the fact that you can see the landscape through it. But as you see it from the side, and as it maybe gently moves as people walk by, you get these really beautiful, deep kind of turquoises or greens or other shades. So I think on that level, it will create quite a remarkable space. And within this gallery, she has selected several non-indépliables nus, the drying racks. But in this case, next slide, these are the ones that are kind of naked and more skeletal. Again, with the kind of the light bulbs and other attributes such as the wires and so on, but they occupy the space. Next slide. And again, this is a SketchUp, so they look more solid obviously than they really are, but these occupy this Gallery 8 space, looking out over to the sea, and next to them, we're also exhibiting the non-folding geometric tipping. Next slide. And the one after, which you can see there in the middle of the screen. And these have a very kind of beautiful relationship to one another in terms of the ideas around folding and unfolding and non-folding. So perhaps with that, since it's already a lot of time, I'll stop there. I'll keep it brief, and then we can allow more time for a conversation across all of us at the end.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was fascinating to see. I think all of us received those amazing technical drawings that Haegue sent across all our institutions. So I'd like to take this opportunity to sort of go full circle and present a short, mine's like 10 slides, of our show here in Manila, which is entitled The Cone of Concern. If I could have this first slide. And actually this show, when I say full circle, this is a show actually which is connected with a show, which was supposed to be sort of like a continuation or partnered, twinned with another show at the Bass Museum in Miami, Florida, which was the title of which was The Cone of Uncertainty. And I think that was why we chose the title for the conversation. It sort of begins that show was the one that opened for Haegue in February. So I think there's a nice way to sort of get into the conversation. So The Cone of Concern is a work is a title that Haegue chose after the exhibition at Miami. So the title of the exhibition is really a forecasting tool for both shows, The Cone of Uncertainty and The Cone of Concern, which projects an area using overlaying circles that could possibly be on the path of an oncoming storm or tropical depression. This being a weather disturbance characterized by strong winds that take place mostly in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. This sort of weather projection is typical of spaces like Florida and Southeast Asia. It passes through Taiwan, even Korea, and the Philippines through Hong Kong. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. She came across this textile called the binakol, which uses a whirlwind pattern. And for her, it was this optical illusion op art thing from the 60s, which sort of came together for her. And the fact that it was based on the whirlwind, this cloth is really used to ward off evil spirits. So for her, there's this coming together of all of her concerns, like her being a shaman, and as we all think she is or consider her to be, and the idea of weather and her interest in weaving sort of all came together through this pattern. So next slide, please. So this is one of the first areas in one of the technical drawings, and here you actually see the pattern intersecting, cutting through the space of the museum. This is the same pattern that's being used in Anne's space at St. Ives. But in the middle, we have a design of a wall work as well, like in all of the spaces, across the institutions. But for our part, we actually used a lenticular print, which allows the audience to actually, so the image sort of changes once you go through it. And it has this, it's overlaid by this idea of movement. So the entire exhibition is about sort of brings together the idea of movement and weaving and weather. Next slide, please. So this is the structure that we've started making, we've made. This is, we have 4 of these cutting through the entire exhibition. So next one, please. This is one of the, there are 3 lenticular prints cutting across the exhibition, and the images coming from here are materiological images that the designer worked with, but at the edge you have the binnacle pattern sort of leading it to the wall structures that we've built. Next slide, please. So again, from the back, this is what you see, but this time we've included these organza textiles that are hanging and cutting across the space, which sort of echo all of the edges and the angles that, and also talk about movement in the space. Next slide, please. So this is how it looks like now. Well, it's a bit more improved now. This is still quite empty, but we've already started fixing everything through the space, and you have Haegue's fans, which will articulate the movement of the organza. The organza is like a 2-tone organza, and these are layered. These are 2 pieces of cloth, which actually echo the movement of the lenticular lens as you go through the exhibition. Next slide, please. So this is how the entire space will look like, with 3 partitioned spaces, and each of them having their particular pattern of the whirlwind and the tropical depression meteorological spaces going through the exhibition. Next slide, please. So we also produced new work for Haegue in Manila, and these were woven images. These are called the Randing Intermediates. I don't know why there are 3. There's only supposed to be 1. So the next one, please. So this is actually the 3 pieces that we have at the moment, and they're all still at the workshop. So one is they're all sort of animal-like, and she's put them together and interspersed them with ideas of what she sees in the Philippines and clothing as well. So these are very minimal shapes, but there is this resonance back to Philippine images and Philippine motifs. Next slide, please. So these are the works are still in the workshop and will be delivered next week. Next slide, please. So we've taken some progress photos because these are so fascinating, because they're all anthropomorphic size woven material, and the intensity with which these works are being done is just, I think, immense, especially during the pandemic when businesses were being cut and labor was already almost half impossible to get. Next slide, please. So I'll just bring you through a very, just the display of the mezzanine floor where Haegue's recreated this tipping walls, and we've had works that her wall works and her early pieces, most of which have already been mentioned and been showed in all the other 3 spaces. Next slide, please. Here, her hardware store collages. I don't think these were in any of the other spaces, but these are her older works from 2013. And I think it's quite interesting to have it here in Manila. Next slide, please. And her her trustworthies, which were made of sandpaper and the origami folding, geometric tipping. Next slide, please. And that's us. Okay, this is how we're working. That's it. So, thank you. So, thank you so much, everyone, for staying on. It's we were hoping this would finish in an hour, but because of all of the things. But I wanted to actually speak to everyone and compare sort of notes how it was. I think we've touched through it on it. Maybe Anne can show herself. We've touched on the ideas of how we had to work through the pandemic. For us, it was very the lockdown sort of really stopped the entire museum from working, and until this moment, the building where we are is closed to the public. So we only come at various stages through the week. And that's made it incredibly difficult to put together the show. Adelina mentioned about the loss of the space for the proposed show in the beginning. How was that affected the scale that Haegue and you were actually working with?
The question's for me, right?
Yes, Adelina. Yeah.
Well, I think that we really intended the show to live in so many different places through the building. There were multiple locations that are now not even open to the public. So we had to rethink how to present the work in a way that would allow for visitors to have the fullest experience of the exhibition, considering the circumstances. There is a secondary new commission, also a wallpaper that I didn't even talk about because I feel we can't make it available to our visitors. So we will we hope that for the duration of the show, at some point between now and the end of January, that area of the museum will become accessible so that we can actually introduce that new commission too. So it made us reconsider the scope, of course, and it was disappointing, but at the same time, we were able to present most of the checklists that we were working with. So, but just create a different kind of path to the building.
Yeah, and for Jihoi, you had the luck of having Haegue with you the whole 6 months. Yeah. And how was that working with Haegue so closely? Because I think all of us were hoping to have Haegue come, or at least one of her team come for installation. Mm-hmm. And I think travel has made it incredibly difficult for anybody to actually move around anywhere. Adelina had mentioned during our previous meeting, even within Canada, it's difficult. But Jihoi, having Haegue, and she's still there, isn't she?
Yes, she is. Is she here? I mean, this is an sort of incredible moment for her as well, because, you know, as we all know, she herself considered as a nomad, and this idea of movements across continent, or like teleportal movement even, is one of her kind of main motif of her artistic practice. So anchoring in one geographic location for more than 6 months seems like a big shift, or kind of a new experience for her. For instance, she would always visit in between the semesters, so she would either come in the extreme cold winter or extreme hot summer. So in between seasons, like like spring is a new kind of environment for her. So like I could really feel that she having so much joy experiencing the spring. But as to preparing the exhibitions, I would say that like, I mean, yes, we did communicate it quite often because we're in the same time zone.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, but probably all of you have communicated very frequently with Haegue, but I would say like I would text her as I was sleeping and kind of saying good morning as I was waking up because we got excited with her. But other than that, she would, I kind of felt that she intentionally kind of keep herself a bit distant from the actual exhibition space because she always wanted to see the show in a fresh eye. She didn't want to sort of have her eye contaminated. So she would rather have her studio staff coming in for major sort of detailed decisions, but she would always come for sort of major decisions. So that was kind of one way. And what was interesting over the press conference is that many people had sort of perceived our exhibition as being very local in a certain extent. And a lot of people have compared that with the difference between her exhibition at Lium, which was 5 years ago, where at that time, many people have perceived her work as being kind of bringing the culture references or sort of anthropological motif across the various continents. But whereas this time she would bring like Korean own traditional fairy tales or the 5 elements that is very kind of Korean, but also at the same time she would start with the kind of motif that she found here, but always trying to not to forget about the linkage that the similar material has across other parts of the world. So she's kind of trying to keep the distance while being here. That was my impression.
Oh, yeah. I think with Anne, I mean, I was thinking that this is the second time she's actually showing at the Tate. Isn't it? Because she's had a show in the past. And to have it at Cornwall, I think is quite special as compared to having it in Bankside, isn't it? Anne? Hi. Oh, you have to unmute yourself?
Push the button.
Thank you.
There you
no,
go.
I don't have control over it. That's what I was trying to say. Yes, no, you know, her work has been shown in Tate Modern, and this is, you know, this is it is on actually, but this is it's a different environment, and that's what makes the Tate sites really interesting. Like even, you know, Tate Britain, Tate Modern, Tate Liverpool, and Tate St Ives, they all have, you know, they're part of the same national institution, but they all have their own characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Tate St Ives is the only one where the collection actually relates to the geographic or the specific context of the place. So that is something that kind of marks it out from the other Tates. It's still international in what it shows, obviously, in terms of the history of modernism or the various histories of modernism, but that perhaps makes it a little bit different, and it's also embedded in a very tiny community. You know, so for me, also moving from New York to St Ives, which has around 11,000 people, you know, is a really interesting transition. And when you exhibit, even though you're exhibiting in Tate, I think also the artists feel there's a different kind of connection or different kind of relationship to that idea of community, and, you know, not just in terms of making or processes or histories, but literally, you know, because you're actually right in the middle of it. So that, I think, is a bit different.
I was wondering, Anne, being all the way, I mean, being in Cornwall, how's the COVID situation been there? How has it affected everything?
Well, obviously, like every other museum and gallery, we're operating with all the relevant safety measures. Our capacity has had to go down. We've had to do, you know, ticketing systems, timed entry. I think that which is the way that most museums now, if they have that technology, have been going. There have been a couple of areas in the building we couldn't use because they were like single entrance and exit and too small. So we had to do some kind of like practical adjustments in order to reopen in the summertime. The town itself is incredibly busy. I mean, literally mobbed people in the summer months. It's quite a seasonal place, but what we have noticed actually this year is that the season is extending. So people who just left at the end of August or September are now staying into September, October and beyond. And I think that's great because, you know, we're going to have the show on for a number of months, and it's really encouraging to see how many people are booking ahead for it. So it's a different feeling this year. It obviously doesn't feel like a normal year. I have to say it's nice to be by the sea, you know, in that sense of feeling very close to nature.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, we're just doing some check because there might be some other things going on. So I was wondering, because in Manila, it's been incredibly challenging, even opening the museum, because even if we're opening the show, we don't know if we can open it to the public. So we're just working towards having the show there. The moment the government allows us to open, then it's there. We're not running anymore. So this has been our challenge, trying to work through that. And with all of the shipping that's being done, Adelina, I don't know. I mean, you were saying you had all of this loans coming in. For us, can you unmute them, Marianne? Just Adelina, just the speakers, please. Okay. Sorry, we're having a bit of a transition for the hosts because we still have curfew in Manila, and my team has to go home, and they're in the museum now, and they have to go home at 9:30.
Okay, I can speak now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're just sort of shifted
Thank
people.
you. Yeah. No, the shipping was probably one of the most unpredictable and uncertain parts of the planning, because as I said, at the moment when we closed it, we had the Seoul shipment arrived and it was in the building within a week. But then we had quite a few loans coming from the United States, and then the situation in the United States was getting worse and worse and worse, and the timelines for museum reopening and people being able to coordinate all that was getting pushed into the summer. So it was, I think it was a huge challenge, but then you realize that there was so much goodwill on all sides to make things happen. And we were kind of learning to live with the situation and making it work for everyone. So I think I want to thank all our colleagues, particularly in the United States, who Lagma and MoMA, who really worked miracles, and the BAS, because we did bring some works from the exhibition in Miami. So they really all helped us get things here in a timely manner.
Yeah, I mean, if Jihoi or Anne wants to jump in or anything with this comment.
Yeah, I mean, like we went through it on a dry run. I think that was kind of a
we did.
Among each other. But I mean, if I could reiterate the story of our financial difficulties that we came across, because we had to bring lots of the lacquer paintings and blinds and bells from Germany to Korea, and that was actually the most kind of arduous processes because the shipping cost was tripled. And therefore we had to give up a lot of promotional aspect. So we reduced drastically amount of the paper media, but more focusing on the digital literacy, like through the social media and so on. So that was one of the adjustments. And something that I didn't tell you in the dry run was that actually In the process of installation, the MMCA had 2 confirmed cases.
Oh
And
no.
so that was like, I think I was having a lunch one day, and then I got a text message saying everybody had to be evacuated. And we were really freaking out. But we are Haegue's team, and we had like 4 days a buffer, luckily, and it actually coincided exactly the 4 days that were delayed, actually 3 days and a half. So we didn't get anything delayed for the opening. So that was another fantastic aspect.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think this things sort of are quite challenging for, I mean, like curating in this day and age. I mean, especially in this time, has been for me incredibly problematic. Trying to negotiate the sort of, I mean, having to engage with I mean, negotiate the reality of COVID, you know, and having to, I mean, it's just for me until now, it's something that I need to keep on grappling with as, I mean, you ask yourself if you're going to open or not, and what your responses are to art in this time. You know, I mean, I want to find out how your spaces are. I mean, we're all curators working on a Haegue show. At this moment, we're all women trying to push through I mean, it's not an easy show. It's not easy producing an exhibition with Haegue, you know? And I have no idea with you, but the challenges have been amazing and also quite fulfilling, you know? And maybe you have your own experiences as curating within this sort of space.
I'm gonna jump in and say that it's. I agree that yes, it's challenging. The projects are so ambitious and all of them, and in so many ways. And being at the end of it, and I know that Anne and Joselina, you're still kind of in that tunnel.
In the midst of it,
that tunnel, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And when you come through at the end of that tunnel and the art is in the space, and even as I came back to work after 4 months of not being able to be in the building, not being able to really be with art in that way, and when we started opening the crate and the work started coming out and we started placing it, and it was like such a feeling of I say rewarding feeling. And now that people come through visitors come through the buildings, and I've been doing quite a few tours with visitors, and their reaction to, like yesterday or a few days ago, somebody wrote back to me after a tour saying how life affirming it is to be in the presence of art. Yes. And you're reminded of how like there's a process of healing that happens, and going back to that shamanistic aspect of Haegue's work, but everyone just felt like they were filled again with that in the presence of the art. And I think that really makes you realize what our work is all about, right? And as curators, being kind of the facilitators between the artists, and the audiences, and for me, that's been really rewarding.
I mean, for us, it's we're still in the. I think Anne will be installing in the next couple of.
Yes.
And in a week or so, right?
From Monday, essentially, I'll be in the gallery full time, and I think what's interesting about the process of working with Haegue and her studio, and of course at Tate's and Ives, it's not just it's a whole team of people. It's like a small army of people that need to work on every aspect of the exhibition in order to make it happen to its fullest. What's special about the process is that Haegue is an incredibly organized person, and so is the studio. It's absolutely excellent. And I happen to work with the one in Berlin, because it's obviously the closer one to us, to where we are. But there's also part of the process where I think, at least it's a personal view, you know, if she feels that there's a new dimension that needs to be explored, or something comes from a combination of experience and intuition that she feels needs to shift, that's something that institutionally we felt that if at all possible, you know, we should be able to respond to it, you know, within the resources that we had. So, you know, even the last couple of months, I think there's, you have to kind of keep slightly open to something that might shift a little bit. But these, yes, having SketchUps that are worked up to that degree is truly extraordinary, and definitely helped in this pandemic time. And we also made the decision to ship everything early in case of another lockdown. So we got it into the country 2 to 3 months early.
Oh, wow.
We were just way too concerned that, you know, we'd pull out the Gabo exhibition, empty the space, and then couldn't get the work in. So we didn't want to jeopardize such an important exhibition. And so that was also a decision we made, which is also obviously not good for the budget, but it was a really strategic decision that we felt we had to do to make sure the exhibition happened.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're actually, I mean, we are talking about practice that seems to be encompassing. I mean, sometimes I think in my head, curatorially, this is like one big show.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like one big show of one artist, and it's just multi-space, multi-sites, and you sort of start thinking, and maybe you get into the space of the artist's head, where everything sort of has a connection somewhere, somehow. So this is like I've been really thinking about and wondering, like, how does it how will it actually come out in the other end? You know? I mean, in a larger scale of thinking, retrospectively, of this sort of show happening at this point in time, and this sort of works that are actually being produced. And for me, this is quite fascinating. And I think he has a question. Yeah.
He's sending questions as like a side note. Do you see
Yes.
them?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, she has a question. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it out there. As a curator in this time, what would be the imagination of the audiences from abroad? Yes, it's very true. I mean, I think we did discuss this during our little dry run, no? Because we actually, it's a very concise question, because I think what we forgot, our audiences are international, most of us, I think. And us, we try to actually access that, but we've had to concentrate to create a balance between online and going local. And this reality of having to look inwards more than we have done in the past for our future exhibitions. And this is what I was going to ask actually next, before Ms. Yang came in. No? How has the current pandemic caused your institutions to rethink exhibitions? Yeah. From Haegue's work onwards, as curators. I think I'm thinking large now, rather than case in point through Haegue's spaces. Have you had to change shows Anne did mention it in the dry run, no? That you've had to work locally.
It was more that I mean, obviously it's interesting, because I don't think Haegue's show could be more timely, you know, in terms of the topics that it covers, while also drawing on sources from multiple cultures, times, and spaces. So it's this very rich and multi-layered experience that audiences will have, whether they're local or international, or national, international, coming to see it at Tate's and Ives. I think for us, we have collaborated in the past with other museums and non-profits, you know, in the UK and internationally. collaboration is obviously something that I think will, rise in the next years as we all really rethink how we use our resources, also from an environmental perspective, and how our audiences actually, even across the UK, don't necessarily overlap. So you might be able to give an artist an opportunity in two areas of Britain, for example, for them to experience an artist and really develop a project that can be even more full and expansive for that artist as well as for audiences. I think we think very carefully in the program already about who to invite and why, but I think those questions will become even more important, and already have, as we've all seen across the museum field. What you program and why will become an increasingly poignant thing to consider. We're embedded in our community, but the civic role of arts institutions, I think, will become increasingly important, as well as bringing in national and international visitors. People have to really focus on that.
I mean, a large question that's been asked. Yeah. Welcome, Haegue.
Hi, Haegue.
Is globalization over? I think we have to start thinking, is it? I really don't think so. I think it continues to be something that we will continue grappling with, maybe differently, perhaps not in the way that we're used to. I think with everything now, it's not something we will be dealing with. For example, I mean, something like this now, this entire conversation, having one artist, being in 4 spaces at the same time, I think is quite unusual and very special. So this is something maybe Adelina might have
I think in terms of that, the question of the global and how it resonates here in Toronto, we are quite a young country, and this is still a young city, and the majority of we're at the point where more than 50% of the population living in the city has been born somewhere else, and so we have the world represented here in so many ways by this diversity in population, and I think it's something that we talk a lot about at the AGO, while we also talk about wanting to lead global conversations and be involved in global conversations. So I think that this balance will be kind of the balancing act, will be the challenge for the future, especially with the lessons from the pandemic. And one of the things that we learned, speaking of those loans coming from other museums, like one of the adjustments we made, and Anne, you mentioned this kind of more environmental way of working. I think we're all learning how much we can do without flying in couriers, for example. That was something that was just not possible. So we had to adjust and find ways to do virtual couriering, and that happened smoothly. And I think that again, like I have to commend my colleagues in those institutions who were very much present and willing to go along with something that we in the art world got so accustomed to, right? That kind of the courier attached to a loan. And so I think we will all be learning, and at the end of this, whatever that is, we probably will be working more sustainably. But I don't think we will lose track of the connection with the world and with each other, even as the local becomes a focus.
I was Haegue asked if we're showing an artist who's a relic of the globalization period. I think actually, Haegue, you prove the opposite. That despite this challenging thing, we've actually put up. I mean, these shows are. I think it's beyond my comprehension that there are 4 shows of this scale everywhere. And I mean, having that sort of tenacity to push through with it, because we could have just said like, we really can't. Here in Manila, we were already halfway through putting together like 3 or 4 of the 6 sculptures we were working on. So we just had to sort of push through with it. And I think it's important to actually continue working in this scale, because I hope it's not the last international artists we work with because of budget cuts on my part. I think it would be a challenge to continue working in this way. No?
I mean, in our case, as I briefly mentioned in the drawing one, that it was not because of the pandemic that our museum started to focus more on the sort of defining or redefining and establishing the missing parts of Korean art history, especially so in the early 20th centuries, that we felt that we were lost because of our preconceived ideas of the political tension between North Korea. So a lot of new things that we discovered, and our new definition about people who are close to Japan or North Korea or kind of revalue for their artistic commitments and the lives that contributed to the art world. But also, if you think about the physicality of the museum and how we should think about sort of maintaining the experience of materiality. And I think we should never, I mean, I felt it more strongly as I was working with Haegue's show, that the MCA has been actually quite a full front in creating digital contents by really doing a lot of curatorial tour by our YouTube channel. And actually we have really a sort of leading amount of people who subscribe to our channel. And the numbers of the view goes like really increased in a short period of time. But is it really the only way to deliver information through the digital platform? Like, what about the spatiality or little intimate spaces that one is confronted when looking at little lacquer paintings within, a compressed space, and like how those experiences would be maintained when you're not accessible to the exhibition space? And one way that the museum, the current discussions that we have in the curatorial department is to really use the outdoor space. I mean, that's kind of the least that we can do, that one should not sort of feel forced to go inside an interior space, but just by being outside, you're more exposed to the cultural elements. Like that's one of the directions that we have at the MMCA.
Yeah, well, MCAD is a very small space, so it's because the college is closed. I mean, curatorially, we have to really rethink our audience and how we will navigate. I mean, at the moment, really don't know how, because we've been working on digital content, as you have, for a while now, ever since the lockdown in March. But it's like this. I mean, we've sort of gotten used to having conversations like this, but there still are moments where it's very stilted and are at turns very awkward. Because there's no engagement really with being able to being with people, basically. And I really have no clue how we're going to go forward. We have this show with Haegue, and we're going to run it for until next year, early next year, and it'll hopefully give us time to think and rethink and reflect on what we've done through this show. And yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions? There's a question. Where is it? Each curator sees the element recurring in the show of the others. Please mention these. It's Haegue. Okay, I thought it was a question from an audience. Well, you are an audience. Please mention these elements to us and tell us what you think about it. Maybe I should start with the idea of I mean, there are many elements that sort of cut across the exhibitions. For me, it was the binnacle and the one with Anne, cutting across, and this idea of textile And then you also have it with the kneelers, this sort of like a points of, and we also have the organza, which is also present in your space, although in a very different way, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
How different are they? Like, I mean, it seems like the patterns seem, at the first sight, it seemed like the patterns seemed quite similar, but perhaps they're different.
I think they're quite similar. I mean, I don't know. I saw the ones. It's just a different structure from the back.
Right.
I think so. This
They're
was
both triangular shapes. Triangular
yes,
shapes with
yeah. Because from the back it looks the same or different. I don't know. Ours are square. Yours are a bit more horizontal, I think, and.
Yeah, it was just kind of large triangular shapes, excuse me, cutting across the space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious about this little like wall at the AGO that they created as an element that you didn't really go through the specifics of it, but it's the kind of wall that I've never seen in other exhibitions of Haegue. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's for me one of the things I was going to, where I was going to answer to the question was that, yeah, there are the architectural interventions in the space, and I think that that wall was really a way to address a larger space that it's quite open and has those very high ceilings. And as we were going through the process of selection and elimination of some of the works, that wall became a way of creating spaces for two different bodies of work. And I think that Haegue was very much interested in, as always, engaging with the architecture, but also exposing kind of the artificiality of the architecture in the space and what it does to create space within space. And I think that all your exhibitions have that language. It's much more common, I feel, the way Haegue responds to the space. And I think the other element for me that maybe unites the exhibitions is also her particular response to each context, and the way she looks at various sources and the way she processed that into new works.
Yeah, I think one thing that always strikes me is the use of Haegue's use of wallpaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's present in quite a lot of her exhibitions for a bit now. And I was wondering, maybe Jihoi, you have a
I mean,
an inkling as to how it comes about.
So for this, the two like we call it the twin graphic elements. Like one would be the DMZ undo, which is the ginormous mural work, but the other one is the graphic work, but produced in the form of banners. And so these two elements are like share similar language, but very distinct. And for us, like having the Gallery 5, the space of Gallery 5 is really huge and sort of expanded. And the way that the space was constructed is that it's rather fluid. There's no wall that kind of completely blocks the view. It's very porous, so you can see every element from different perspective. And what was particularly striking, there was one moment that I saw lacquer painting and the murals at the same time, and they're very distinct piece of work. But the way that in which that a Haegue as a sculptor deal with the two dimension is a particularly interesting one, because like she calls it as a kind of an act of putting an elephant into a fridge. That you're trying to put a completely impossible massive gravity and scale into a completely compressed flatness. And there, like, she has such a freedom to make lots of our preconceived ideas free. And I think that was like a really interesting moment of finding. And particularly for the banner works, and as I mentioned, it was actually a first time that she ever sort of dealt with these materials. So we went through lots of processes of making it float in the air at the same time, not to have it sort of transpired so that the other side of the banner is visible on the other side. And also there were the paper elements that we tried for the first time. So so there are a lot of elements that were added to the graphic presence. So yeah, that was an interesting finding for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were, for me, it was the decision to actually work with weaving was for me incredibly challenging. And I think as a curator, to see something new, as you say, the banners are there, and to be able to lock the ideas of something, I mean, really local, in the same way in Cornwall and in Canada. This particularity, I think, is quite special. And I personally, as a curator, was I was quite happy to have her engage in such a local language for us. No? When I think this is her way of trying to understand spaces or contexts. No, I don't know. This is for me how I see it, and it's been very fulfilling seeing something which I would never have thought of doing an entire rattan weaving in that scale, to be perfectly honest. But to see an artist who's been working globally and to go into that space, I think is something quite special. And
Isn't
challenges.
it a kind of a, I mean, like Haegue is here, but it's like one way of this, a symptom perhaps is a globalisms in the
Yes.
art exhibition making would be that to have this kind of sense of foreign or sense of distance perhaps because like for instance the rattan would be extremely familiar material for you, but also at the same time the Haegue, she probably would feel
very
by approaching it, and there should be lots of processes of prudence, but that seemed to be one of the patterns that kind of keep appearing
everywhere.
And yes, of course it becomes it grows, it doesn't stay as one thing, and I think that is the value of Haegue. But the very act of kind of using this material as the mode of interpretation is a language that has been sort of seen a lot. And I wonder what would be the next step of that if one cannot travel anymore, and if one cannot research in that depth, and what would be the alternative of that? Like if one cannot really experience one place as before.
Well, I guess there are questions we have to figure out as we move in the future, really. There is one question that's very, very concrete, which is what challenges in international coordination, like for shipping, promotions, and funding, have been particularly pressing for everyone? Personally, for me, it was amazing that my funders did not back out. Some of them cut it, but they were like, well, I think there was this this decision on their part to continue engaging with an organization that really wanted to continue with pushing the project. No, I think there was that trust, but maybe others would have a reply to this. But what were international coordination, for example? I mean, I don't know. For us, it continued. Okay, at the moment, we have some work stuck in customs, and we can't get it out. For this is something that's yeah, every step of the way is a challenge for us here. But perhaps other places will have similar but maybe less challenging moments for funding, I suppose. For
for me, something I think it's in response to what Anne was saying about maintaining that flexibility for things to shift. And I think that for me remains, it's mostly like an institutional challenge, and how an institution is building in that flexibility. And sometimes, as I mentioned, we are an encyclopedic museum. Contemporary art is one of the 5 departments, right? So I think that when it comes to contemporary art, I'm always trying to build, to get the institution to become more flexible and allow for that space of change and shift to happen. And I still see it as possible through the next month and through the run of the exhibition, but it's kind of an ongoing project. And I think that I want to express my thanks to thank you for bearing with us through all the challenges that came, because it is a complex project and at times can be can surprise you in ways that was not expected.
I mean, I think we should go now in a bit, but before we go, I'm really quite interested to ask how you engage with the situation, because Anne did mention that you had to do with labor for installation. It was not, you didn't have an entire group that you usually would have for a quicker install. And of course, these are concrete challenges. I mean, there are curatorial problems that we have to deal with. These are realities, but in the time of pandemic, I think it becomes doubly exponentially bigger for us. I mean, I don't know how you're engaging with this and how you're working through these limitations. Yes.
She needs to be unmuted.
And are you? She's muted.
Thank you. Yeah, no control over the meeting. Yeah, I think what I was mentioning was the fact that our exhibition installations are generally going to take 4 weeks and not 3, and that's because of the social distancing of technicians in particular sizes of bubbles. So on a very practical level, that's already, it's a higher cost. It means it's closed for 1 week longer. So it's not insurmountable. It's just kind of irritating that you have to spin that out because you want it to be open sooner, but that's just a very physical and practical restraint.
Yeah.
I think I agree with Jihoi that there's absolutely nothing that compares with the actual physical and bodily experience of being in a room and experiencing art. We have had to overcome a challenge right now with the residency that was supposed to be here. And it was just a commentary really that what we've done is an artist who's currently living outside the country and was supposed to come to St. Ives. We have a very fabulous and imaginative education team who have basically set up multiple meetings and coffees and interviews with this artist, as well as sending lots of research, not just with us at Tate, but with people within the town, so that he can get a virtual idea of what it's like. And then hopefully if the pandemic, pulls back a little bit, he'll be able to come in person. But, I think it means rethinking everything that you're doing. Sending just a bunch of documents to him and having one call is not enough to give him a fully rounded view. And actually they should be different views, not just the same view. So that's been something that the conversations are rolling over at least a 2-week period that they're organizing. It's never the same, but it's just one solution.
I mean, I'm wondering if actually, we go back to pre-COVID. I mean, like not even pre-COVID, pre-moment where international travel was a thing. There was a moment when it was not everybody was traveling. I mean, the advent of the Uber curator traveling everywhere and curating from airports has sort of become legend. But before that, there was none. I mean, there were less artists traveling, there were less curators traveling, and this what Anne has just described was something that was how it was being done before all the traveling was going on. This sort of internationalism was dependent on an exchange. And there's a question asking that this decentralized world, global world, has now become quite fragmented. So we sort of return to this, and maybe even regionalized, saying that the sum of the region doesn't necessarily make an international world. I mean, then we start parsing ideas of what international means. But for me, when Anne said the idea of having to work with this artist and having to send, and so that for me, I mean, I don't know what you think of that. This conversation has just made me realize that, yeah, we are working in a time when there is no travel. It's so difficult for artists to actually move around. And I mean, I go back to how MCAD was set up, because there were few international artists coming to Manila, and now there will be much less. So how does everyone think of this? You think this is a reality that's happening, or is this something that's changing our way of working?
I think it has to do with I mean, less about identity, but more about the perspective in a way, because I think the idea of traveling or being in a different place puts you in a kind of relatively distance mode that I was speaking before, or kind of going outside of your box and trying to, I mean, put yourself out there to the possibility that your preconceived idea could be wrong, and a sense of openness. And I don't think we can ever go back to the state where your world is your compound. I mean, compound nation state. I mean, you can never ever go back to that state. So then what would it be if you're outside of your box? Your thought is you're outside of your box, but your body is kind of still like locked into this country. Then what may come in there, or like how does this exchange of ideas could occur with the local resources, and what can be the ways in which we can be creative, so that you don't stuck with kind of like xenophobic sort of self-centered perspective. I think that it's about the attitude, really.
Yeah. Adelina?
Yeah, no, I think it may be a temporary situation in terms of this extensive traveling that we used to do. And I agree that maybe it requires a different kind of imagination to move forward. And I think maybe this moment can allow for that, not at all levels, right? As I said, we're reimagining how to work without courier, and we're reimagining how to, install. It was very difficult to install without the artist being present, but, we're all doing our best. And I mean, Haegue will travel to England, right, Anne? So there is hope that, fingers crossed, that as we learn to live with this situation, that we think we'll start to go back to a new normal that will be different. But I think that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it is a moment of reimagination, and we are in those positions to maybe shape that new normal as we emerged out of this crisis globally.
Okay, I think this is has gone quite, and this has been absolutely fascinating. Really, I have one huge question from idea, thought bubble, I think, from Haegue. I don't know if I should, because it'll be probably another 30 minutes. But I'd like to, yeah, if I bring it up. But I will say it, and then maybe we can go home and, well, we are home. Maybe we can go away. People forget. Yeah, I know. You can sort of go away with these ideas. And I think these are, well, this is the value actually of a Haegue Yang exhibition, is actually challenges you to think outside of things, you know, of imagined spaces and processes of art making. So this is from the artist. So for me, this kind of proposal of having this conversation is already a hope. Not all the learnings from the world was not a dream. No? And I'm curious, what would be your definition of the reality of art in the future? Is the reality a mere perception of the change and difficulty, or really something that will mutate into a form of sci-fi and virtual, like what we have now? Maybe even inclusive of non-human in the sense of new materialism and the Anthropocene. How about the existing social and economic discrepancy inherited even in the new era?
Yeah.
So we can still see if our travel plans can extend to that point. So thank you, everyone. And for those who attended and are still here, thank you for staying on.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, have a nice evening, and have a
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.